Hello, I am Jeff Gentry, and this is my final presentation for MTRE 6750 Ethics in Robotics. I'll be speaking today about an overlooked subject, the ethics of robotic monitoring in the workplace. Concerns regarding privacy, justice, and autonomy are emerging as robots and artificial intelligence are utilized more and more to monitor worker performance and safety. Over the next few minutes, I'll walk through the technology, the ethical theories we can apply, and what current research is saying about this complex issue. First, let's frame how this poses an ethical problem. In many modern workplaces, such as warehouses, factories, and logistics centers, robotic systems and AI tools are being used to track how fast people work, how safely they move, and whether they follow procedures. These systems are being adopted for increased efficiency and worker safety, but that raises an ethical question. Is it ethical for robots to monitor human coworkers for productivity and safety violations? At first glance, it seems like a straightforward trade-off. However, a closer look reveals that it touches on basic issues of worker dignity, trust, and the distribution of power between humans and machines. I believe this gap is emphasized by the actions of the U.S. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau issuing guidance on October 24, 2024. The agency warned that companies using third-party digital tracking and opaque decision-making systems, such as black box AI tools, must follow Fair Credit Reporting Act rules. But here's the issue. If we had strong, up-to-date ethical and legal frameworks governing AI surveillance at work, there wouldn't be a need to stretch the FCRA, a law originally designed for credit reporting, to cover AI-driven workplace monitoring. That regulatory Hail Mary underscores just how urgent and unresolved this ethical question really is. To understand the ethical issues, we need to look at what these systems actually do. AI-powered cameras and sensors can track worker location, movements, productivity metrics, PPE compliance, and even signs of fatigue or drowsiness. These tools are often marketed as safety enhancements, helping prevent injuries or detect risky behavior in real time. For example, one system estimates a worker's safety zone and then alerts if it is violated. Another uses computer vision to ensure PPE is being worn properly. These are real, live applications being tested and deployed in workplaces today. Although these technologies are frequently presented as safety tools, that isn't necessarily the case. Numerous technologies start monitoring how quickly employees complete jobs, how much time they spend idle, and whether they are hitting efficiency targets. Things change at this point. These systems begin policing workers rather than merely protecting them. The data may be used by management to detect noncompliance or reprimand slower workers based on cold figures rather than context or speech. The problem is that AI isn't able to see everything. It is unable to determine whether someone slowed down for a valid purpose or paused to assist a colleague. It just detects deviance. At this point, the moral issues of justice, openness, and dignity truly start to take center stage. It's important to establish the discussion's foundation and fundamental ethical theories before starting the literature review. First, deontology stresses that employees should be valued as goals in and of themselves, rather than merely as a means to increase output. Technologies used for surveillance must respect workers' inherent rights and dignity. Second, justice theory, which is founded on the principles of equity, requires that surveillance systems be developed and implemented in a way that does not exacerbate already existing disparities or give rise to new structural disadvantages for employees. Last but not least, virtue ethics emphasizes how crucial it is for businesses to foster virtues like accountability, honesty, and transparency, particularly when developing and deploying AI systems that observe human behavior. The literature review will be studied and assessed using these three ideas as the ethical framework. Let's now consider what recent research indicates regarding AI surveillance and its effects on workers while keeping these ethical theories in mind. Research on the ethical, psychological, and social effects of AI and surveillance technologies in the workplace are examined in this literature review. The loss of worker autonomy, risk to privacy and dignity, and elevated psychological stress are among the recurring themes found in all of these sources. Nonetheless, other studies also point to possible advantages, like better efficiency and safety results, illustrating a complex environment. The absence of long-term research to monitor long-term worker outcomes and the need for more useful frameworks that businesses can use to apply AI ethically are two major gaps that have been discovered. Three primary criteria were used to evaluate each study: how ethical issues were addressed, how the research findings affected employee well-being, and how much useful advice the studies provided businesses. When taken as a whole, these resources offer a thorough and important basis for comprehending the obligations and difficulties related to AI in the workplace. Hickok and Masledge examine how algorithmic worker surveillance and productivity score tools are being used more and more in many industries. The OECD AI principles and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights are two important policy frameworks that are used in their research to assess these technologies. They discover that worker surveillance erodes freedom of speech, privacy, and dignity, while also sustaining power disparities that are detrimental to collective worker action. Their work's concrete roadmap, which offers precise policy recommendations for bridging the gap between ethical concerns and legal protections, is one of its main strengths. Their argument's main flaw, though, is that it is mostly conceptual in nature and lacks empirical support for its practical implications. Although their plan is straightforward and doable, they point out that additional empirical research is required to gauge the actual effects on employees. The influence of workplace surveillance on employee well-being is the subject of the following study by Glavin, Bierman, and Scheiman. They discovered that surveillance indirectly raises psychological anguish and decreases job satisfaction based on a nationwide study of Canadian workers. This occurs as a result of mediators such as increased work demands, less autonomy, and invasions of privacy. A major strength of their work is using a stress proliferation model, where the researchers explain this by showing how surveillance leads to secondary stressors that are detrimental to well-being. Although the study provides valuable insights, its cross-sectional data means that long-term investigations are still needed to truly demonstrate causality across time. El Halali's paper examines the expanding application of AI in workplace safety and health. The study emphasizes the ways in which AI may improve worker safety, from predictive maintenance that averts mishaps before they occur to real-time health monitoring and intelligent PPE systems. But it also issues a warning about significant difficulties. One of the strengths of this paper is a comprehensive look at both the technological benefits and the ethical challenges of integrating AI surveillance in worker environments. Problems include things like data protection, the moral use of monitoring systems, and the requirement to train and educate the workforce. The conclusion is that although AI provides effective instruments to enhance safety, successful implementation requires striking a balance between innovation and the defense of workers' rights and dignity. Niehaus et al.'s study investigates how workers' job control and mental health are being impacted by automation and artificial intelligence. In a survey of more than 8,000 workers in Germany, they discovered that workers had less control over their tasks the more instructions they received from robots. This resulted in more repetitious work, physical stress, and even burnout symptoms like tiredness. It's interesting to note that workers' autonomy was not reduced when AI systems executed repetitive tasks. A strength of this paper is the use of large representative survey data, while at the same time, a drawback is that it relied on self-reporting that could introduce bias. The authors stress that although automation can enhance certain parts of work, it can also negatively impact workers' autonomy and well-being if not properly designed. According to their conclusions, AI technologies should be integrated more carefully while keeping human concerns in mind. Vargas provides a critical analysis of the ways in which established racial and economic oppressive structures are mirrored and exacerbated by artificial intelligence. The study uses a framework of racial capitalism to show how underprivileged people are exploited in the creation of AI, both through computational biases that disproportionately impact minority populations and underpaid labor. This paper's ability to explain contemporary technical exploitation by integrating historical context is one of its main strengths, though it does not provide specific policy remedies. Vargas' main contribution is to reframe discussions of AI ethics to take systemic economic structures into account. He contends that genuine transformation necessitates a thorough rethinking of the capitalistic dynamics that propel technical advancement rather than merely improving AI. Sebastian Ehinger and Miller discuss the moral dilemmas associated with workplace computer vision surveillance. In addition to offering an intent-based ethical framework to direct the development and implementation of the technology, They critically examine its applications for safety, productivity, and behavior monitoring. Their findings highlight significant threats to workers' autonomy, privacy, and dignity, particularly when monitoring tools are employed in an opaque or out of proportion manner. The paper's ability to provide a useful framework for stakeholders to utilize when developing or assessing these systems is one of its main advantages. The report does admit that additional empirical research is required to support its approach, including worker surveys and case studies. Helping firms better reconcile the advantages of workplace surveillance with their ethical duties to their employees is the main contribution here. The literature review demonstrates how worker autonomy, dignity, and mental health are significantly impacted by AI-based workplace surveillance. There is broad consensus from numerous research that these technologies can negatively impact employee well-being if they are not properly regulated or ethically developed. But there are still significant gaps. A large portion of current research is conceptual or predicated on fleeting observations. Long-term empirical research and useful design techniques are required for AI systems that uphold moral principles. Additionally, this review poses important new questions. How can AI monitoring methods be genuinely consistent with fairness and regard for workers' dignity? What kinds of frameworks for laws and policies are necessary to uphold moral principles? Future studies should concentrate on filling in these gaps, especially by creating ethical design models that are applicable in the real world and assessing the real-world experiences of employees who are monitored by surveillance technologies. We'll now look at the application of three important ethical theories, deontology, justice theory, and virtue ethics, to examine the moral dilemmas raised by robotic monitoring, building on these findings and the necessity for ethical guidance. The three ethical theories that inform our analysis restated from before are deontology, justice theory, and virtue ethics, briefly reviewed on the left. We apply each idea to robotic monitoring on the right. Instead of treating workers like data inputs, deontology reminds us to protect their dignity. According to justice theory, disadvantaged populations shouldn't be unjustly burdened by surveillance technologies. A culture of respect and trust is required by virtue ethics. Therefore, monitoring needs to be open and morally sound. By putting these theories into practice, we can create a framework for robotic workplace monitoring that is ethical and responsible. The majority of in-house robotic monitoring systems are not covered by the Fair Credit Reporting Act, or FCRA, which primarily regulates third-party evaluators. As a result, there is a significant governance gap when businesses are not closely monitored. Although some localities are experimenting with municipal laws, there are not yet more comprehensive safeguards. While presently optional and unenforceable, the White House has released an AI Bill of Rights framework that describes values including privacy, equity, and responsibility. The lack of explicit legislation does not, in and of itself, justify unethical behavior. We must acknowledge the distinction between ethics and legality. Even though a large portion of the literature criticizes workplace surveillance, it's important to recognize opposing viewpoints. Certain types of monitoring, particularly for safety reasons, can really stop incidents and save lives. Additionally, businesses contend that surveillance technologies can increase output and hold employees responsible. However, this leads to an ethical conflict between upholding human rights and dignity and corporate effectiveness. The normalization effect, in which employees feel under pressure to adopt more invasive technologies just to maintain their positions, is a serious concern. Transparency, genuine consent, and safeguarding employees' meaningful autonomy, not simply operational results, must be the main focus of ethical governance going forward. In conclusion, basic ethical values such as worker autonomy, rights, and dignity can be violated by robotic monitoring systems. The application of virtue ethics, justice theory, and deontology demonstrates a persistent demand for more robust safeguards and significant governance. Both ethical and legal frameworks must be used to close the existing legal gaps where internal systems are mainly unregulated. To ethically guide robotic monitoring in the workplace, a comprehensive ethical approach is required. In the end, we have to make sure that technology is employed to promote rather than undermine human well-being.